Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of this Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau, and I am excited to have you join me today. We have been doing this series, which I've been having a lot of fun with, working through my Clutter Clinic, which is my speaker series that I developed it feels like forever ago. And I used to go around, and hopefully now I'll be getting back into going around to people in person doing this Clutter Clinic speaker series where we talk about the root of clutter, where it comes from, the different types of clutter, the 5 clutter pitfalls, and then some specific strategies that we can use to kind of attack those trouble areas. So far in the series, we have covered garages. Last week, we covered closets and we talked about all different types of closets. And today, we are doing a listener requested Clutter Clinic topic, which is kids' spaces. And I know that for some people that might not apply, but for a lot of you, kids' spaces can be or is the bane of your existence. But before we get into all of that, I just want to talk to you again. I mentioned it last week, but I want to mention again about my friend Kara Harvey, who runs the Purpose Driven Mom community. She's Purpose Driven Mom podcast, Purpose Driven Mom on Instagram, Facebook group. She has a free on demand workshop that is all about productivity, primarily for moms. So I figured definitely mention it, especially during this episode, since we're focusing in on kid spaces. And it's really about how you can put together some practical productivity steps. And she uses Trello, which I don't use, but she's like the Trello guru. And so she's got a free Trello downboard. She explains what it is, how to use it. And she is very motivating and inspiring herself. And I just love the energy that she puts out there. So if you head on into the show notes, you will be able to click directly on the link to access this free workshop. Or if you're listening right now, and you're by your computer, you can just go to a purposedrivenmom.com/Lori. That's Laurie. And that'll take you right to her event. And you can, like I said, it's a free thing and you get all these goodies. So definitely check that out. Okay. So today we're talking about kid spaces. And when we think about kid spaces, I think of playrooms, but not everybody has a dedicated playroom space. So whether you live in an apartment and your living room and your kid's bedroom is doubling as a play space, or if you live in maybe a smaller home and maybe you've converted your living room or dining room into a play space for the kids, or you have a big home and you have a dedicated playroom, bonus room, basement, whatever. It always tends to be a huge clutter attractor because of the nature of what it is. You're constantly having stuff that are coming in and out of rotation, and there's new stuff coming in. And you also are dealing with kids who intuitively, by and large, are not the most organized. I mean, occasionally you get a kid that is just naturally organized and likes to put stuff away, but most kids don't. Most kids enjoy the taking out and the playing with it, but the putting it away is the part that needs a little bit of work. So wanted to go through. I in the other two episodes, I started with some statistics. So I'm actually going to get out my papers. So I don't have any necessary statistics about playrooms per se, but I do have some statistics about the toy and game industry, which I found a little bit fascinating. So there was a recent statistic that came out in January of 2021, and it was this is specifically for the United States. So it's the U.S. hobby toy and game store sales were estimated just in January, just for the month. Okay, $1.6 billion. 1 month, $1.6 billion. Um, Now it's interesting because they go back and they say in 2019, it was for the entire year of 2019, it was a $16.5 billion industry. And that is a decrease because back in 2016, it was $18 billion. So the trend was that we were peaking at like $18 million. Then we started going down, and then COVID happened. And that actually gave a boost in the game industry. And I kind of feel like we all get a little bit of a pass because we were at home in quarantine. So I don't know about your family, but we were doing puzzles and we were ordering board games and we were doing stuff because we were all at home. So I think the COVID-19 pandemic, or I don't think, I know it had a huge impact in the toy industry. So I'm actually reading this statistic right here. It says the coronavirus pandemic had a negative influence on many aspects of retail. However, the sales of toys actually grew positively in the United States. So they said that sales increased over 200%, and puzzles were by far the fastest growing toy and game category in March of 2020, which I think makes sense. So I guess now the statistics, it's going to be interesting to see moving forward post pandemic. Hopefully, we'll be on a downward trajectory. But when we look at these statistical numbers for the toy and game industry, it obviously goes to show that our consumption in our homes is a lot. And when we look at where the volume of toys used to be for kids going back 50 years, then 40 years, then when I was kids to, when 20 years ago when my kids were born, the volume just keeps increasing. It used to be that you just had one or two dolls. Now you've got 20 American Girl dolls. You used to have a few sets of Legos or a thing of Lincoln Logs, and now you've got, every time your kid has a birthday party, they get 20 new Lego sets or whatever they're interested in. And it's very hard because we tend to fall into this like keeping up with the Joneses mentality. And this is what we need. This is what we're doing. We like this. We have to have all of it. I remember back in the day, it was like a little people's house thing. I'm like drawing a blank to what it was called, but it was these, plastic toys that there was a whole village. So there was the beauty shop and the post office and a stable and, a schoolhouse. And it was everyone was like, "Oh, Zoe's into this when she was 3. Let's get her that for her birthday." So everybody got her something. So one birthday party, we got an entire village. And you have to have room to store this stuff. And for a lot of people, like we were fortunate, I guess, and I'm using fortunate with air quotes, that we had the luxury of space in having the basement, but it's still, how do you store this stuff? And what about people that don't? What about people that have small space living? Where do you keep all of this stuff? It's very hard to stay organized when you have a volume of stuff. So when we talk about kid spaces and we talk about clutter, I was really kind of going through in preparation for this call and thinking about how the 5 clutter pitfalls really play and how the 3 types of clutter come into play. Our 3 types of clutter, which are physical clutter, emotional clutter, and calendar clutter, and how each one of those plays into toys, games, things of that nature. And then coupling that with our 5 clutter pitfalls: procrastination, indecision, guilt, overwhelm, and time. And we'll walk through them, check through, like put a check mark next to each one of those, because you wouldn't think maybe on the surface that Kid Spaces hits all of those buttons, but they actually do. So let's talk about it. So here are just some 5 kind of overarching statements, if you will, that I want to just put out there. One of the biggest things, which I already addressed, is keeping up with the Joneses. That my kid, this is the hottest toy in the market. My kid has to have it. Or, now our kids are getting stimulation, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, wherever, they're just constantly bombarded with advertisements. And whether it's, you know, soft sell stuff that an influencer's doing that they're like, oh, this seems cool and I want this, or if it's an actual just old school ad that they see or their friends have it. They're just bombarded. And so again, it's keeping up all like they're getting that stimulation from multiple places. The second thing is, again, we'll talk about this, is just that guilt factor, right? The guilt of grandma gave this to me, or, my kids might play with it one day, or what if they want it? So there's that whole factor. This is another big thing when it comes to kid zones. And I was thinking about my own kids, is that kids want to play where you are. So even if you say, okay, our playroom is in the back of the house, we have a dedicated playroom. If you're making dinner and you're in the kitchen, especially if your kids are younger, they want to be where you are. At least I know my kids did. And that was a big thing when my kids were younger, where Josh and I would bicker a bunch because I would have these mini zones. So we had our basement, which was a finished basement with a playroom, all the big stuff. We had puppet theater, dress ups, all the toys, everything was down there and it was all organized. But I didn't want to always be hanging in the basement, nor could I be. If I, like I said, I was doing laundry, I was making dinner, I just had other things that I needed to do. And when they were younger, they didn't necessarily want to be down there. Maybe if they had a friend over, they would, but especially at that toddler age, not so much. So I would have these mini zones. I had a mini zone in our family room, which was like right off our kitchen. And then they each had like little mini zones in their room. Not They didn't have a ton of stuff up there, but they had a small bookshelf. They had a small, like a couple bins of toys. And so we had these mini zones. So naturally, stuff is going to get transported from one to another. So it's keeping that volume at bay and staying on top of it. And, not just saying, okay, this is the toy zone from a logical level, and we're just going to have stuff there, because our lives are fluid. And so that's another reason that toy zones can become out of control. The fourth thing I want to just make a comment on, and 4 and 5 kind of go together, is that kids will play with what they have. So I know I've been guilty of saying, oh, they might play with this. They haven't played with it in a while, but they might come back to it. At one point, they loved dinosaurs. What if they come back to it, even though they're out of dinosaurs right now? And if you put something, a bunch of toys in front of them, especially we're talking younger kids, they're going to play with what's available. And most kids will not have like long-term memory. If it's not their favorite, right? If it's just something that was in the mix, if it's not there and they have something else, they're happily just play with what they have. And this goes with number 5, which is less is more. And we'll talk about this when we kind of get into the purging versus the organizing part of it. We tend to think that giving our kids options is a great idea. I know as an adult, I struggle with decision fatigue. When I talk to clients or people come to me, or when I'm doing coaching and consulting, decision fatigue is overwhelming. And I know last week we were talking about closets, and we were talking about how you can have an entirely filled closet and still have nothing to wear. And that's because the stuff is either outdated, you're over it, it doesn't, look good on you anymore. The same rules apply with toys. Sometimes they have a shelf life. Your kids have played with them, they've outgrown them, they're missing parts. Maybe their kids just are just not into that theme or whatever it is anymore. And so the stuff is just there. So if you can just remove it and just give them like whatever that they're interested in playing in, and then maybe even cycle out periodically, that actually gives them room to use their creativity, and it also keeps the clutter at bay. So there's studies that really show, I was going down this whole rabbit hole of minimalism in toys. And I didn't want this episode to be about minimalism because that's not really what my lane is. Although I do like to have less. I'm not telling you that your kid should only have three types of wooden blocks and that's it. Like, I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is really be on top of cycling through the stuff that they're playing with. Okay. So getting my notes out. Okay. So when we talk about organizing, oh, actually, let me take a break. I'm going to take a break. Sorry, again, when I'm doing it by myself, I tend to forget when I'm supposed to take a break. Let me take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the difference between purging and the importance of it, when you should do it, all the things, and then how to actually organize for sustainable purposes for your kids. So sit tight. Okay, we're back. So we're talking kid spaces. We're talking about why it's the bane of our existence, why there's so much stuff. It's an industry that's gotten out of control. It's really challenging with all of the external factors that our kids are exposed to through social media, through their friends, just through, they're on technology. There's, ads that are coming crawling all over the place, that they're just pummeled with all of this external stimuli that is, giving them these dopamine hits of, I need this, I want this is going to make my life better. I mean, it's what happens with us as adults. Why do we think it's any different with our kids? But I think one of the things as parents we want to be mindful of is recognizing that this is something that we want to start teaching our kids early. I'm a big believer. I have a whole chapter in my book about getting kids organized and getting kids involved in the process, that this is a life skill. And the earlier you can start involving your kids in part of the process, the better off they're going to be long term. It's going to help them to decrease the emotional attachments that come with emotional clutter. And it's going to give them, even if they're intuitively designed to have more attachments, more natural attachments to things, if you can teach them the skills and the strategies of how to work through that, as opposed to just throwing stuff away in the dark of night, um, they're going to be better off long term. And these are skills that will help them in other areas when they're not playing with toys. It will help them with stuff, with papers or clothes, or one day, household stuff. So physical stuff, we know we're getting a lot of stuff coming in. Emotional stuff, we talked a little bit about it, is that guilt and fear. And guilt and fear stems from, when you look at the toys games, is the parents have a lot of guilt and fear going, oh, that was their favorite toy, or they might come back to it, or a lot of times it's that what if, what if my next child, what if I have another child? And I think we need to couple that also with that indecision piece, which when we get into the 5 clutter pitfalls, is what do we do with this stuff? Where's our relocate pile for those items that we might want to hold on to for another kid, for a hand me down, in case the kids want to come back to it? So I think we need to look at the emotional clutter. When was the last time our kids played with it? What's the likelihood that they will play with it again? And then again, if it is something, is this something that will be replaceable if we did need to access this, or is this something that we can't? So those are the kinds of questions with emotional clutter that you want to ask. And I think for a lot of people, when it comes to toys, they think it's just going to end up in a landfill, and none of us want that. We all want to avoid polluting the environment and adding to any of this overconsumption problem. But there are tons of resources, charities, organizations that will take gently used toys, whether it's locally in your backyard, whether it's like a church or a synagogue or a shelter. Or again, I know that there are national organizations that will, I'm drawing a blank right now. There's an organization that does all the big plastic toys, those big like play like those play school toys, like the schoolhouse and things like that, the ride on toys that maybe you don't use anymore and they take them and get recycled. I'm drawing a blank. I'll put it in the show notes. I forget what they're called. Um, but great, great organizations. But another reason is that the reason why clutter toy stuff becomes clutter so often is you're dealing with a lot of different age groups. If parent, especially if a parent has multiple kids, you're going to be having baby stuff all the way up to like however old. It could be 8, 10 years old, maybe even more. But that's a spectrum of toys from, exercisers and jumpy things to, pretend play, puppet theaters and teepees and play kitchens and all of that stuff, moving into the smaller things, which are like Barbies and Legos and Littlest Playhouse and whatever. I don't even know, Pet Shop and all that stuff. I don't even know what they have out anymore. Um, my people can help me out. Some of our listeners can help me out. Obviously, I'm dating myself. And then as they get older, kids start getting into more electronics. And so you have all of those things with Minecraft and video games and all of that stuff. So you have this spectrum of stuff that your space can't always accommodate everything all at once. So you have to stay on top of moving that stuff around, cycling the old out, bringing the new in. And how can you do it in a way that is not going to be breaking your bank with constantly getting you storage stuff and easy to maintain? I think those are the really the key pieces. And so let's talk through some purging tips, shall we? Okay. So I have 5 specific tips for purging a kid space. So the first thing I ask everybody to do is think about it as coming from a place of service. And what I mean by that, hang on, I have to take a drink. This is what happens when I do these solo episodes. When we think about we're not going to be using this anymore, I want you to think about how can this benefit somebody else? And that is the example that I've always set in our home with my kids, as well as when I work with a client and I'm working with their kids. Who can benefit from this? If you're not playing with this, if you're not using this, is there somebody else who can? Who do we know that can? And maybe you need to be, as the parent, proactive and doing a little bit of research ahead of time, especially if you know that your kid might struggle with some attachment or emotional issues. Looking at, okay, what is my kid interested in? What would be something that would get them excited about paying it forward? What would get them excited about donating their stuff? Is it that they're donating it to their little cousin or their old preschool or to a charity that they can drop the stuff off? Or is your church doing some sort of mission group or whatever it is, getting them excited about it? And if there's, again, most young kids are super well versed on technology, so if there's a website that you can send them to and show them the impact, a lot of times kids are reluctant to get rid of things. And this goes for adults as well, but specifically, kids are reluctant to get rid of things because they think it's just going to end up in the trash and they don't want to be wasteful. And so, if they don't know what's going to happen to something, they tend to just want to hold on to it. So, the more that you can show them this is the next step and we're doing this to help somebody else, that is how I always start any of these purging projects. And then, so leading with service, number one. The second thing is make it part of your routine. So make it a tradition in terms of purging. So you can do a couple times a year. I always say do at least 1 to 2 times a year for a big purge. And you can cycle that around like the holidays, Christmas or Hanukkah. We used to do when my kids were little, when my girls were little, a couple weeks before Christmas, we would go down to the basement and we would together collectively do a group purging in preparation of Santa dropping off new stuff. And knowing that we were going to be donating the stuff that we weren't playing with anymore to the less fortunate kids. That's what Zoe used to say. So that's what we were doing. And so it was something that once they understood that and they understood the ramifications and the why we were doing it, so they had the buy-in, which I always say is super important. And then we gave them the strategy using our empty sort purge ESP, making our 4 piles. What do we keep? What are we donating? What are we recycling? What are we relocating? Doing that, working through that with the kids, it made the process really a lot less painful. So that leads into, and then the other time you can do it is you can do it at the end of school if you want to do it like seasonally, or if your kids around their birthday, if you want, again, depending on when their birthday falls. Obviously, if their birthday is, right around the holidays, you don't have to necessarily do it again. But for example, if they have a spring or summer birthday, that's also another good time of, you might be getting some new stuff in. Let's make some room for it. And you can do a second cycle. Earth Day is also another great time because, again, we're doing stuff for the earth and we want to keep stuff out of landfills. So that's in April. So you could do, a December and an April. So that's a couple times a year for you to just work that in. And if you do those big purges, then just little cleanups in between should help get you through. And this leads me into number 3, which is what I say, teach them while they're young. And I started, the age old question is, at what age should I start getting my kids involved? And I say, like, as soon as you can, like, let them witness it from when they are 6, 9 months old. And then as soon as they can start holding the book, and when you're done reading it, showing them where it goes on the bookshelf, or you're playing with a toy and you mimic, or you show them, this is where it goes in this bin, and you just start leading by example. And then rewarding them like, yay, great job, when you incorporate the cleanup, which we'll talk about in the organizing strategies. I think that's really important. But purging and getting them involved, as opposed to the getting rid of stuff in the dark of night, which a lot of parents do, and I've been guilty of it myself, is something that I really, really encourage people to do. When you get rid of stuff in the dark of night, it's a short term fix, it's a band aid. Most parents do it because they don't want to battle with their kids. They do it because they can do it quicker and, quicker and easier without less hassle. I totally completely understand that. But what you're doing is you're robbing your kids of the opportunity to learn decision making skills, to really hone that in. What am I doing and why am I doing it? So you're robbing them of that opportunity. Second of all, you're also, it can be counterproductive because they know that at any given moment their stuff can just vanish and disappear, as opposed to them having some ownership and control over, I'm done with this and now I'm ready to move on, as opposed to, I was playing with this and now it's gone, or them being involved of knowing what the next step is. And especially if you have a kid that struggles with emotional clutter and things that have feelings and all that, and I've been there, done that, that again can backfire in your face. So have I ever thrown stuff away in the dark of night? Of course I have. But I would encourage anybody out there to not use that as your go-to strategy. Really get the kids involved. The next thing that I want to say is look at your space to inventory ratio. And we talked about this with last week with closets. And this is again going to really factor in, depending on where your playroom is and what type of stuff you have. But giving kids defined space to keep X thing is really important. So, for example, what do I mean by this? I have girls that love stuffed animals. If you have a ton of stuffed animals, you know that they're big and they're bulky and they take up a lot of space. And they're also dust collectors. But I get it. Your kids like them. So I would recommend having one or two big baskets that you can store the stuffed animals. Once that basket is filled, that is the volume for stuffed animals. So as we get new stuffed animals, that is when we need to start cycling through, because all of our stuffed animals need to fit within the confines of the space that we defined. And you can apply that to anything. You can apply that again for Legos, or you can apply it for Barbies or whatever kids are playing with, figurines, action figures, cars, trucks, whatever your defined space is. And if it's a closet and you have stuff all in the closet, then figure out what are the bins and baskets or pullouts or whatever I'm using that will house what I have. And do I have the right storage for that? Because again, if I have a really small space, but my kids have a ton of stuff, the choice is, am I going to have disorganization and just have my stuff everywhere? Or if I want to keep order, I have to thin out the volume. So it's that space to inventory ratio. And then the fifth one, which I mentioned, is using my ESP method with your kids, which is super easy. It stands for empty, sort, and purge. I talk about it. I have a whole chapter about it in the book, Hot Mess. And it is the way that kids can, and for kids, it's great because you could just say, I want you, and you take this one bin. So let's use stuffed animals. You take the one bin of stuffed animals and you say, today we're just going to ESP your stuffed animals. So that means you're going to empty that bin of stuffed animals. You're going to sort them into your piles, which are, what are the ones I'm going to keep? What are the ones I'm going to donate? What are the ones that I'm going to recycle because they're torn, broken, gross, missing a piece if it's something like a toy or a game? And what are the ones what's going to relocate? Is there something that's going to memory? Hopefully you don't have a ton of in kid spaces. You probably hopefully don't have a ton of relocate, but relocate could be if your kid is outgrown said toy or category of toys, but you're saving it for a younger sibling. So let's say there's an age range and you have all your infant baby toys and you want to keep them because you know that you have another one on the way, but they're probably not going to use them for a year or maybe even two. So you would, instead of having them out, just these are going to be in rotation, you're going to want to bin those up, label them infant toys, and put them in an appropriate storage place where it's out of that area. And that could be either a garage, an attic, a base or a basement, storage area, what have you. So that's the organizing ESP. And so if you do that and you use that method, those two big times a year, and then you do it a few many times when things starting to get like a little crazy, that will allow you to keep the clutter hopefully at bay. So that's purging. Now, what do we do when it comes to the actual strategy for organizing? So now we've purged the stuff. So now we have an ample amount of inventory, right? But what do we do with that, right? So for example, okay, we got this, but where do we store it all? How do we store it so that our arts and crafts supplies aren't everywhere and our American Girl clothes aren't all over the place? So a couple of organizing tips. I recommend doing a sweep every time your kids play or having the kids do it. And what I mean by that is you want to clean up after every time. Um, a lot of times, especially if your playroom is not in a shared space, we have the tendency to just leave the basement a mess, leave the dedicated playroom a mess. And I think first of all, it's just a bad habit. I think it's a really good habit to get into. We made a mess, we clean it up, because that mentality translates to other spaces in the house. It translates to, I made a meal, I cleaned up my food. I finished eating, I put my stuff in the dishes. I get out of bed, I make my bed in the morning. I get undressed, I put my clothes in the hamper. You see where I'm going with this? So every time we play, the next thing we do when we're done is we clean up. And so working that in, building that muscle from an early age is really, really important. It also avoids one of our clutter pitfalls, which is that feeling of overwhelm. If you're staying on top of it on a daily basis, then you are avoiding the first one, which is procrastination, and then also the overwhelm. So you're really hitting two of the five clutter pitfalls. The next thing is about the furniture or the storage that you're wanting, that I recommend for most kid spaces. The first one is any type of multi-purpose furniture that you can use. So if that's an arts and crafts table that has storage underneath the desk or underneath the chairs. There's a ton of ones from like Creighton Kids. IKEA has tons of inexpensive kids storage stuff. Obviously, you can look at like Pottery Barn if you want, but you don't have to spend a ton of money. I mean, you can get them, like I said, even nowadays at like Target, wherever, there are tons of storage multi-purpose furniture stuff options for kids. So I would definitely think of that specifically when it comes to arts and crafts, where you can have a caddy with crayons and colored pencils, and then maybe have the paper underneath, or like a pull-out drawer or shelf. Great for kids. Speaking of which, cubbies are my go-to. My kids used to have the cubbies from IKEA. You can buy them again now. You can buy them pretty much anywhere. But when my kids were younger, IKEA was like the go-to for cubbies. And what I loved about them is you can get all different types of bins to put in the cubbies. So you could get clear bins, you could get color-coded bins, you could get acrylic bins, you could get fabric bins, and they were inexpensive, and it was easy. When everything is put away, it's aesthetically like clean and simple. You don't see the clutter. You don't see the stuff out. And so it's awesome. And it's something that you could cycle out. So you could, if your kid's really into cars and trucks, you could have a cubby with a bin filled with cars and trucks. And then as they outgrow that and they move into something else, you could repurpose that cubby for another category. So I definitely think cubbies are the way to go. Easy to reach, and this goes for anything, easy to reach. You want things, unless it's something that you don't want the kids to have access to, so maybe paints or maybe Play-Doh or maybe some other projects where you want them on a higher shelf or at a site of the kids that you want to have access to. Anything that you want to empower your kids to have ownership, you want to keep it at their height. So I usually keep things at like the 3 to 4 foot height max. That way kids can reach it themselves, or maybe just one little step stool to reach it. And that way they don't have to ask you for help on getting it or for putting it away. So bookcases are a big one. My kids were big readers. I had, and bookshelves are great. I mean, and you can get them, like you can find them at a thrift store and throw like some cute paint on it, maybe do some decorations. Like I've repurposed furniture it's was like a hobby of mine, and I used to do it all the time for kids. I took an old changing table and I made that into a bookshelf. I mean, really like simple, inexpensive things that kids could reach. And most kids like books. And so if you want to have it and have them kind of corralled there, that is something that you can easily put into a space. Underbed storage. So this is a big one for people who maybe don't have a dedicated playroom and their kids use their bedrooms as part of their play space. Maybe you need to have a part of your closet where you could maybe that's another place where cubbies could come in, or something like a low modular bookshelf where you put it in the inside the closet, but also pull out underbed storage. And I always say to people, if you can get it with wheels, like something like with wheels, that's great because you can just roll them in and out. Most of them will go if you have a carpet or an area rug, but certainly, obviously, if you have, hardwood floors or tile or something of that nature, rolling it makes it super, super simple. And again, this way, stuff doesn't just like go under the bed to be forgotten. You can go and the kids will actually, play, and that'll be great. What else can I tell you? Oh, pictures and colors. That's another great way. If you're going to start doing labeling with younger kids, I love using pictures. Um, to get them to identify, because before most kids can read, they can identify things by pictures. And this goes through with clothes as well, where if you had a picture of your shirts or a picture of your socks or underwear or shorts or whatever, kids will know where the stuff goes. Same for your play stuff. You get a picture of blocks or trucks or cars or Barbies or whatever it is. And it makes it super, super simple for the kids, and it helps them get involved and excited about the process. Um, this is another thing, and this is really, I can't stress this enough, and that has to do with being specific. Being specific on what you want your kids to do. And this is a combination, kind of goes with the purging and the organizing. Telling kids, and I've talked about this before, go and clean your room or go and clean the playroom is way too broad. It's overwhelming, it's ambiguous. And again, when we think about that whole indecision piece or an overwhelm and all of the other clutter pitfalls, the more specific you could be, the easier and greater chance you'll have at success. And so I think it's really important for you to say, today we're going to focus in on organizing the fill in the blank craft table. We're going to focus in on cleaning out your trucks, the puppet theater, our dress up area, whatever it is. And if your kids are big into dress up, consider using hooks. If you have the space, if you have the luxury space, either on a wall or in a closet, hooks are great because then they can just hang them up and easily grab and go, as opposed to having them in a big bin and then they're diving through looking for that princess costume or that fireman costume or whatever it is, and then everything's all over the floor. So again, think about yourself. What's the easiest retrieval for you and easiest way to clean up? And so the more simple you can make and practical you can make your system, the easier it will be for your kids to maintain it. So those are my organizing tips. I am going to take one more quick break. And then when we come back, I am just going to wrap up with a couple of action points for you. So sit tight. All right, guys. So kid spaces, like I said, there's a lot of emotion that comes into play. There's a lot of moving parts. It's constantly evolving. There's new stuff coming in. Sometimes we get stuff we don't want our kids to play with, or maybe we don't want our kids to play with it now. We want to put it away. It's okay if you can have an in between grow area, if you can assign a spot for that. I tell people use clear storage bins. Again, shout out for Sterilite. I use their clear latched um, storage stuff, and I could label it grow. I could label it regift. You could label it art supplies or whatever the category is. Great, but keep them out of sight, but keep it in a place that it doesn't go out of your mind. So move it to a place that you know where that relocate place is when you need to get it so that you don't miss that cycle. On my website, I have a free kids 30-day organizing challenge. I did it a few years ago. It was an exercise I did with my own kids. It was super successful. And I had mentioned to a couple of friends, they wanted to do it with their kids. And so I posted on the website. If you go on to simplybeorganized.com and you head on over to our resources page, you'll see the free kids 30-day organizing checklist. And it's awesome. And if there's something that doesn't apply, maybe we reference something in a basement or whatever, and it doesn't apply to you, you can substitute it for something else. I'll also put a link to it in the show notes so you could check that out there. If you are on YouTube, make sure you can watch your videos or with the kids. I mean, I know it's super exciting, but pull up some other videos of fun organizing stuff and make organizing fun. I try to gamify things with the kids. I would do organizing races. I talk about all this stuff in the book in detail. So if you haven't picked up my book, Hot Mess, A Practical Guide to Getting Organized, definitely check it out and read the chapter specifically on getting kids organized. I have several chapters on that. It's something that I think is really important because we're teaching this younger generation these life skills, and it has to do with understanding consumption. It has to deal with service, giving back, and it has to do with living an organized life. So I hope that you found that all the stuff useful today. Keep your recommendations coming. I love hearing from you guys. Next week, we're going to be going back into the house, into the kitchen, which is my favorite space in the house to organize. And we're going to be talking all about fun kitchen stuff. So make sure you check it out. Until next week, I am Lori Palau. Peace out.